We are creatures of desire. What we most desire is meaning. What makes us suffer most is a lack of meaning.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Marital therapist, author, and communications trainer Andrew G. Marshall invites guests from all walks of life to discuss what makes life meaningful.
Hello, I'm Andrew G. Marshall. Welcome to The Meaningful Life. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and wherever you find your podcasts. How does our personality impact on our behavior? How much of it is inherited through our genes? How much is down to our upbringing and how life impacts on us? These are questions that go back through the ages, but were crystallized in the Big Five personality model, which was developed in the 60s based on research about language from the 30s. But today we're going to take this a stage further and add a sixth dimension, a spiritual transcendent scale, and look at how personality and meaning fit together. My witness is Dr. RALPH Piedmont, who studied with the original team who developed the Big Five theory. He received his Ph.D. in personality psychology from Boston University. He was a full professor in the Department of Pastoral Counseling at Loyola University Maryland and is now the managing director of the Center for Professional Studies. Let's start at the very beginning, Ralph. What is personality and how does it help us understand ourselves and each other?
Okay, very good question. I loved all the questions you asked at the beginning because I have answers to those questions.
We're coming to them, don't worry.
Well, what is personality? I'll give you my definition of personality. Personality represents that intrinsic adaptive organization of the individual that is stable over time and consistent across situations. 4 points of interest to the definition. 1, personality represents something internal to us. There's some organization, some structure that puts together the myriad motivations and drives that we have in an organized way and helps us to focus that as we engage our environment. This second point is that this intrinsic organization is inherently adaptive. We try to acquire styles of engagement with our environment that maximize our impact and success in our environment. This structure, now when we talk about personality, something to keep in mind, there's no such thing as a good personality or a bad personality. Personality is what personality is. Okay? The question is, will your personality, which was developed in an original context, your family of origin, how well will that personality style, which is very adaptive there, generalize to a new environment? You know, I remember being on job interviews, especially when I applied to Loyola for my position there, I was asked, well, what are your strengths? And I remember giving a list of 3 or 4 of what I considered to be my most important strengths and characteristics. And then they asked me, well, what are your weaknesses? And I said, the same 4 characteristics. Because in some places they work, in other places they don't work. So that's the whole twist of personality, is trying to get who we are to work well in new environments that we move into. Now, this internal structure is stable over time. Now, what research seems to indicate is that from birth to about 30 years of age, our personality is molding, it's forming, it's honing itself, and there could be shifts and changes in the relative strength of expression of these different 5 factors. But by the time we reach age 30, as Gordon Allport says, personality is set like plaster, in that we're pretty much how you are at age 30 is going to be how you are at age 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80. I know a lot of people have a problem with that statement. And they say, what, there's no hope for me? It's like, there's always hope for you. As long as you're in the game, there's always possibilities. But stability in personality is a very, very important adaptive quality for human beings. Having a stable personality, what it does for us, it enables us to make long-term commitments. And this is important. For example, marriage. We select a partner for life. Well, we pick this person because they feel good with us. They make us feel good. We're compatible. We have similar interests. And it's on the basis that those interests, perspectives, and styles are going to continue to move forward over time allows us to make that relationship and to enjoy that relationship over time. A lot of times when couples run into distress and are seeking to divorce or to move apart, what's the problem? Well, this doesn't seem to be the man that I married, or this doesn't seem to be the woman that I married. For some reason, they've changed. And so the aspect of change can be very disruptive in making these long-term commitments. The same thing about work. We pick a vocational area. For example, I chose to go into psychology. This was a major commitment. After college, it was another 8-9 years of training to get my Ph.D., to do my postdoc, to be ready to go into the field. It would be really difficult that after those 9-10 years, I decided, it's not for me. That would have wasted a lot of resources, a lot of time, and puts me all the way back from a developmental perspective. So having this kind of stability really gives us the ability to make these long-term commitments, because as human beings, as we will probably discuss further on in our discussion, what separates us from all other animals is our ability to have long-range intentionality, to be able to plan over the long time span of our life, of the next 6 months, or even over the course of eternity. So that's how we're always thinking.
So as a marital therapist, I'm always dealing with people who say, my husband has changed or my wife hasn't changed. I've changed, but you haven't, sort of kind of thing.
Right.
So is this an illusion that they're having themselves, or has their personality actually changed?
Well, that's another great question. Some of the work that I've done with the Big Five is to apply measuring the 5-factor model in couples. And I've come up with a process called the crossover analysis plan. And what we do is we have the couple sit down. They will fill out the NEO-PI3, which is a commercially available measure of the 5-factor model, developed by my mentors, Drs. Costa and McRae. And then what I do is I ask them to rate each other. So on this scale, fill out the scale as you think your spouse would. So I wind up with 4 protocols, 2 self-reports, 2 observer ratings. And what I like to do is take, let's say, the husband's rating of the wife and comparing it to the wife's self-report. Now, in research, happily married couples show a lot of agreement in these ratings, that what a wife says about herself will agree with what the husband says and vice versa. What I find that couples in distress, it's not always the case. And that what we'll do is that we'll find differences between what the rater says and what the ratee says about themselves. And what we found is that these distortions or disagreements for the husband, let's say the husband rates the wife as being more neurotic and then she rates herself. Well, that, number one, is an indication of some level of dissatisfaction in the husband. And the lack of agreement on this dimension gives me some idea as to the types of issues the husband is having with the wife. And a lot of times what we find when we say that people, you've changed. Well, sometimes people misinterpret what a person is doing or misunderstand where a person's real personality may actually be. And a lot of times the conflict and distress in a relationship may be because people are misinterpreting the motivations of their partner, and they may be missing that. So, for example, we had this one couple where the husband rated the wife as very high on neuroticism, but she was very average on neuroticism, which means that he found her as being very bitchy and complaining and unstable. She rated him much lower on openness than he rated himself, because she sees him as closed-minded, non-emotive, unempathetic. What was going on in this relationship was the cycle where this woman was trying to express her feelings. She felt that the husband wasn't hearing that, which made her angry, which made the husband think that she's just being bitchy.
So who is right? Is it your self-rating or is it the partner's rating? Which one do you think is the more honest?
It doesn't matter. It's an opportunity for dialogue between the couple, for them to sit and to understand and look at their relationship and better understand the patterns of behavior and the intentions behind them stated from each side of the couple.
Okay, well, let's actually understand how the Big Five were actually developed. And we'll in a moment go on and explain what the Big Five are. I'll take you through them one by one. But actually how it was put together, I think is really interesting. So explain to me.
Sure. Gordon Allport was the man behind all of this. And one of the issues that he was finding, and this is back in the 1930s, again, the problem got worse after that, but there was a plethora of different personality constructs: introversion, extroversion, telic dominance, narcissism, authority. There's just hundreds of personality variables out there. Are they all important? Are they all meaningful? A lot of them seem to be coming from particular theoretical orientations, particularly a psychoanalytic one at first, 1930s, that was the big one. But he wanted to know what's really meaningful. How do I go about creating meaning in this world, the sea of personality dynamics and theories, in a way that puts order to it? And you know, science, just to make a little aside there, hard sciences are brilliant at these things. They have this wonderful way of looking at all the possibilities and just focusing in on what's most important. For example, when we look at stars in the night sky, stars have a particular brightness, and they're rated on a 1 to 10 scale in terms of brightness. And of all the stars in the sky, which star do you think is rated as number 1, having a brightness of number 1? That serves as a comparison.
I don't know. The North Star? The North Pole Star?
Oh, no. Who's the North Pole Star? What do we know about the North Pole? What happens if you live in Australia? Where's the North Star there? Well, of all the stars, why not pick our star, the sun? We like the sun. We all know the sun. We enjoy our sun. So we pick our sun as being number 1 in brightness. And that serves as the standard for comparing all other ones. Same thing with temperature. When we look at Fahrenheit temperature, you know, or better yet, let's talk about Celsius. He's much more direct. Celsius, when he came up with his measurement of temperature, wanted to put it on a meaningful scale. So what did he say? So he said, well, let's look at water, see where water freezes, and we'll call that 0. And where water boils, we'll call that 100. Why water? We like water. Water's good. Could he have used a different element like gallium or carbon? Of course you could. It's all relative. But gallium and carbon are really not well-known entities to us. But water, we got a winner there. So Allport was wondering, is there an objective place that we can go to that seems reasonable, that everybody's aware of, that we're all familiar with, that we could start as a way of trying to identify qualities of personality that are important to us? And what he came up with was absolutely brilliant. We call it the lexical hypothesis. The lexical hypothesis is this: human beings have language. Why do we have language? Because it helps us to cope and adapt in our environment. You know, the reason why when you compare human beings today with their non-speaking relatives, they're not here, but we are, because the language gave us that advantage. Well, why is language so important to us? Well, from Allport's point of view, our language, our dictionary of terms, our lexicon, is really a repository of our history and wisdom of adaptation and survival in our world. Because what language does, it takes important adaptive features of our environment and gives it a word. So things that are important to us get words. What are things that are important to us? Where to get food, what food to eat, where are dangers, where are safeties, but also who's a good friend, who's a good leader, who's a potential enemy. We have all of these important adaptive issues in our lives, and it makes sense that over time, we will develop words to capture those salient qualities. It's like Eskimos and snow. Eskimos have about 18 different words for snow. And in English, how many words for snow do we have?
Well, about 1 or 2. We've got snow, slush, and sleet.
Okay, 3 words. Why? Well, if we look out our window today, we're not going to see much snow, are we?
No.
But in Alaska and the North Pole, there's always snow. And snow is an important adaptive feature. There's the snow to build your igloos out of. There's snow that's good for traveling your sleds over. Snow that you don't want to travel over. So all of these words are important. And what the lexical hypothesis is saying is that we develop these words because they are important. And as social animals, surviving in group is also important. So it stands to reason, according to Allport, that we have terms that we've developed that capture and describe important personality aspects of other people. So what he did, he got his student, a man called Dr. Odbert, who for his dissertation went to the fourth unabridged Webster's Dictionary, and he went through and pulled out every adjective that people would use for describing other people. And at the end of the day, he came up with 17,956 different adjectives.
Wow.
That's a lot of adjectives. And what that started was over the next 40, 50 years was research looking at subsets of these adjectives to try and understand, well, we have redundancies, we have synonyms, antonyms, da-da-da-da. Do these adjectives cohere around different groupings? And what that research finally came to say, and this man Warren Norman in 1964 was really the first one to say that the Big Five was really important, was that there were 5 factors that emerged around these adjectives, 5 separate groups of adjectives. And they defined the 5 factors of the 5-factor model, which are, number 1.
Well, let me take you through them, because you've got a scale as well. So I'm going to give you the title and what's on the low end and what's on the high end of it. And then you can explain to me what you mean by this. So the first one is extroversion. On the low end, we've got quiet and withdrawn. And on the high end, we've got outgoing. So talk me through that.
Sure. Extroversion is an interesting dimension because there's really 2 dynamics that go on with extroversion. One of them is the interpersonal engagement. So you have people who like going to parties, they're outgoing, they're talkative, they're friendly, they're approachable, versus being, I like being by myself. I'm a little distant, aloof, a little cold appearing. But the other dimension that's on extroversion is an energy dimension, okay? People high in extroversion also have a lot of energy. They have a personal tempo. They like moving and doing things. They could be excitement seekers. They like taking risks and challenges. And they also have this charisma about them we call positive emotions. They talk in ways human beings love charisma. When people talk, oh, what a wonderful podcast you have here, Andrew, and you're doing such an outstanding job. I'm surprised. That kind of exuberant type of language creates charisma and energy. And that's all part of that other aspect of extroversion. So people can be, what's interesting, people can be high on one and low on the other. They don't necessarily have to always move together. For example, I see myself as somebody who's pretty much of an introvert. You know, I'm a researcher. I spend a lot of time writing papers, analyzing data, spending time by myself. But I do have a lot of personal energy and outgoingness. So when I sit in an environment like this, I can be perky and hopefully charismatic and engaging and funny and friendly. But, you know, when this is over, the one thing that I'm going to need to do is take a nap. I'm going to need to recharge my batteries. So that's what's on extroversion, those 2 things.
The next one is agreeableness. You can be low, which is aloof, and you can be high, which is warm.
Yes, agreeableness and extroversion define what we call our interpersonal style. In that when we look at interpersonal behavior, it's like love and dominance kind of thing. E and A are the 2 variables that define that interpersonal style. Agreeableness is looking at my attitude towards people. People high in agreeableness are caring, altruistic, tender-minded. They're compliant. They do what you ask them to do, as opposed to people who are low in agreeable, much more manipulative, cynical, very Machiavellian in how they approach and deal with other individuals.
So number 3 is conscientiousness. On the low end, we've got carefree, and on the high end, we've got responsible goals.
Yep. Conscientiousness looks at the degree of personal organization that we have and our aspirations, our goal-directedness. So people high on conscientiousness have a lot of self-discipline and deliberation. They're able to focus on a task and get the task done, even when there's challenging environmental issues that pop up to you, like it's a hot, sweaty day and your favorite baseball game is on or soccer match is on, but you know you got to mow the lawn. What do? Well, the high conscientious person gets up and mows the lawn because they know what it is they have to do. They usually set high standards for themselves and aspire to reach these high socially meaningful goals. People low on conscientiousness, they're not so much impulsive, but they lack the self-discipline. They tend to take the easy way forward. Like water, they find the simplest path to move through. They're not very ambitious. They're laid back. They tend to enjoy the simple pleasures of life and don't worry about necessarily what may be coming tomorrow.
So the next one is one that I think I'm very interested in, takes a lot of my work up, and this is emotional stability stroke neuroticism. Mm-hmm. On the low end, we have moody, tense, low self-confidence, and on the high end, stable and confident.
Yes. Neuroticism, or I'm going to talk about it as the neuroticism dimension because that's in the Costa-McCrae model, how they talk about it. It's NEOAC. Neuroticism looks at negative affect, the extent to which we may have emotional dysphoria around things like feeling depressed or blue or sad or anxious or easily frustrated. People high on neuroticism, they tend to be impulsive, which means that they're unable to stop themselves from doing things that they know they should not do. So it's like people who are high on neuroticism have problems with smoke cessation or weight loss programs. They find it high to comply because they're always tempted to have that extra cigarette or get that piece of cake. Individuals low on neuroticism tend not to experience much negative affect. Now, that doesn't mean that they're experiencing positive affect. That's extroversion. This is just about negative affect. So individuals low on neuroticism tend to be even-keeled. They tend to be unflappable. They tend to cope well with stress and don't feel much put off balance when situations challenge them.
So this is another interesting one, and I think you capture very well the two ends of the spectrum. The fifth and final one is openness. On the low end, we've got rigid, and on the high end, you've just put imaginative, which I thought was really interesting. So tell me about that.
Sure. Openness to experience, really, if you look at it, is the newest personality dimension to have merged into our lexicon. What openness is, it looks at flexibility, creativity, the desire for structure. People high on openness don't like structure. They tend to be creative, inquisitive. They're open to explore new issues and new ideas. They like meeting new cultures. They like spending time on reflection. People low on openness like structure. They like concreteness and clarity. They tend not to, when discussing any particular kind of problem, they don't really get into the broad conceptual debate. They're more bottom line focused people. So if you're doing a sales pitch to somebody, well, to make the low openness person buy, you need to tell, well, this is what this means to you. Bottom line. They like that. High open person, they want to discuss the issue. So you want to give a more broader presentation and engagement of the various strengths and weaknesses of whatever product that you're selling. They like that the most.
So how is the Big Five used today?
Big Five is used in a number of different ways. One of the first ways that we can use it, it's a taxonomy. Okay, it's a way of organizing all of the many different personality variables that are out there. In that, a lot of research that I've been involved in and other people have showed that when we take variables that have historically been seen as personality dimensions, that all of those constructs coming from all different kinds of conceptual models all fit within the five-factor framework. So whatever most constructs you can pull out, like type A behavior, for example, that's an important construct for coronary heart disease and other health-related issues. What does that represent about people? Well, for the extent to which type A behavior correlates with heart disease and heart problems, it's a measure of low agreeableness is what it is. And in fact, low agreeableness has been shown to predict 10 years in advance the amount of plaque in people's hearts, okay, with people with heart problems. So it's a very useful taxonomy for understanding scales. And what it does, it helps us to compare different scales. A lot of times people will develop a scale. Oh, I've got, the outgoing scale. Okay. And somebody else comes along and saying, hey, I've got the gregariousness scale.
And I've got the sexy scale.
You got the sexy scale. Now, are all these scales the same or are they all different? There's a thing we call the jingle and jangle fallacies, which is the belief that because two scales have different names, they measure different things, the jangle fallacy, or because they have similar names, they're measuring the same thing, the jingle fallacy. But the only way to really determine the extent of overlap between two scales, correlate them both with the Big Five, and see what I call their personological fingerprint. What is the pattern of their associations across these five factors? The more common associations they share, the more overlap between the two scales. So that's one way it's used. The second way, because it provides this powerful organization of personality dynamics, the model itself becomes a very powerful predictor of a wide range of outcomes, whether it's competitive behavior, success at work, risk for getting a DSM diagnosis. It's just a wonderfully robust, cross-culturally generalizable. So these 5 factors are seen as universal human features that can predict whatever you want very well.
So this seems very useful for psychological researchers. What about for us, the average man in the street? Can we use it to improve our lives?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think everybody should take the Neo for themselves to see who they are. I think it's one of the most important things I've learned about life is that the more you know about yourself, the better your life is going to be. You really need to know and understand who are you as a person so you can better understand why you're doing the things that you're doing. And are they really the things you want to do? I've seen, just in my life going through, I've seen people who have set out. Well, here's a good example. A young undergraduate student that I had met several years ago, very bright young man. He was in the engineering program at a university, working very hard. And he was there because his parents wanted him there. So he went there. He majored in engineering, made his parents happy. He got his degree in engineering. And once he graduated and was now 22 years old and on his own, do you know what he did? He went to his natural passion to cooking. He wanted to be a chef. And that's what he did. He always loved cooking and baking and new products. And so he left and he went somewhere to develop his cooking and chef skills. And I think, well, I can understand his need to want to please his parents, but in some ways he wasted 4 years of his life. He could have spent that 4 years at a culinary school doing what his passion is, but instead delayed that because he wanted to appeal to other people. And this happens a lot of times in people's lives. They pick things because they feel, well, I need to do this. My parents want me to do this, or I feel that I have to make this statement in my life. But these engagements really don't jive with what the heart really wants. What are these basic desires that you have? And that's what the Big Five is capturing. It captures these 5 broad categories of desires that we have. Being high on conscientiousness means that I'm always going to really want to move in the direction of competitiveness, of challenging environments, of trying to improve things and improve myself. It's what makes me feel happy. And to deny that would be something that would create emotional distress and discomfort with the life that we're leading.
So the question I asked at the very beginning is how much of this is inherited through our genes and how much is down to our upbringing and life impacting on us? And you said you have the answers to these questions.
I do.
Share them with me.
Absolutely. There's a whole field of study called behavioral genetics that's designed to look at the inheritability of the psychological qualities that we have. And basically, what it tries to do is break it down into genetic variants and environmental variants. And the environmental variance is also broken down into what we call shared and non-shared environmental variants. Okay. A lot of this research is based on twin studies. Some countries like Denmark, for example, and Norway, they have these big registries of everybody who's born. And what they do is they look up to find the births of both monozygotic and dizygotic twins that were separated at birth and raised in either different or similar environments. And this kind of paradigm allows us to look at genetic versus environmental factors and to parse out in any construct the contribution of these qualities. And what do we know from behavioral genetics? Well, overall, about 50% of the variance in the big 5 factors is genetically inheritable. The other 50% we can attribute to environmental factors, but when we break it up into shared and non-shared environment, it's the non-shared environmental experiences that play the larger role in shaping our personalities.
So when did you become interested in having a 6th dimension to this?
Well, great question. I took the job on at Loyola in their pastoral counseling department, where spirituality was an important component to the work that they were doing in the counseling field. So I became involved in looking at spiritual constructs. And one of the first things I started looking at is, well, how does spirituality connect to the big 5, essentially? Where is it? Extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness? Where did it go? And what I was starting to find was that it really didn't fit with the big five. I was like, it seemed to be something different from those big five factors. So I started thinking, what could this be? And I realized that, spirituality and religion is a very, very interesting and unique construct to study, because spirituality and religiousness is something that only human beings have. It's unique to our species only. And religion and spirituality has been with us from the get-go. And that as far as we can track it down, we know thousands of years ago when somebody died, they were buried. People stopped. They took time. There was some type of ceremony or rite for processing this. And that throughout the ages, across the cultures, religion and spirituality have been important variables shaping human experience across law, medicine, science, philosophy, political considerations. So this seems to be a very important kind of variable for understanding our unique humanity. So that really got me intrigued. And I say, could there be something else here? Now, another great feature of the Big Five is that it's an empirically developed taxonomy. So it outlines the five, at this point, major traits, dimensions that organize all of personality. But as an empirical model, it is an open model. It's not static, in that there's certain empirical criteria that if met, one could argue that you would have a sixth or a seventh personality dimension. So my goal was to see, can I pull something out of this religion and spirituality that would be a separate dimension from the Big Five, that would have sufficient breadth, content breadth to be its own dimension? Does it have predictive value over and above the Big Five in explaining important outcomes in life? Is it cross-culturally universal? Does it have a causal impact on important behaviors? So that was where my research went. And the first stage in that was developing a scale called Spiritual Transcendence, which seemed to meet all of the criteria for being considered a sixth factor. But a lot of that was it still came from a religious kind of background, had a lot of that language. And with further reading of the existentialists and also some theologians, and a shout out to Paul Tillich, who was very influential in my thinking, we realized that what's going on here is a broader existential drive, that human beings really are motivated to ask big questions. What is life? Who am I? And how do I fit into this bigger piece of the puzzle? This is all about existentialism. And at the heart of existentialism are three, Paul Tillich calls them fears or anxieties, but they can be questions or concerns, but they are foundational to being an existential person. So what are those three fears? What do you think the number one fear is, Andrew?
I'm not good enough.
Well, you're in the top three, but the number one is death, the end.
All right.
The fear of death seems to be like the number one concern we all have, because we're living our lives. We're trying to build a life. And how do I build meaning, depth, and coherence to a life that's ultimately going to end? And what happens after that end? So the fear of death is one. Another one.
Let me try and see if I can guess the next one. So fear of death. Am I good enough? I think something about, am I getting it right? Sort of kind of thing. Am I a valuable human being? I suppose that's back to, am I good enough?
Yeah.
Okay. I give in. So tell me what the next one is.
Is there any intrinsic meaning to life?
All right. Yeah.
So those are the three core dimensions of an existential construct that I've come to call the numinous. The numinous looks at our ontological inquisitiveness, our desire to want to seek out and connect with a more implicit or tacit reality that underlies the ongoing experience of events in our life. So we're always trying to find answers to and deal with, well, given this whole larger reality, what is it with death? And inherent to that is what we call a psychological time perspective. Time goes in a linear feature, tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. But psychologically, time is a much more fluid experience for us. And as human beings, we tend to sometimes put ourselves in a category. Some people tend to be past-oriented. Some people tend to be present-oriented. Some people tend to be future-oriented. And what research has shown is that people with a future orientation tend to have more resilience, more personal success and structure in their life than the other two groups. But the future time perspective can be divided up into two ways. One is our mortal future, in that from today to the day I die could be a future orientation. But then there's a transcendental time perspective. For this, these types of people see their lives now as being one stage in a larger eternal process, in that they see their lives going on for eternity. And when you see your life in that kind of perspective, that has a massive positive impact psychologically on who we are. It creates an incredible freeing experience where I don't need to count costs for anything, where people are able to go all in on some endeavor, cause that is very important to them, that's usually all about transforming societies, making communities better.
So what's low and what's high on this numinous scale? My second question is, where do you sit on it? And thirdly, how do we actually use the scale?
You know, that I love your questions, and I just want to give some sense for how long I struggled to find an answer to what's the low end of this. You know, for many years, we were trying to understand spirituality. We understand people who are very spiritual, but what is the opposite of spirituality? And we looked at things like narcissism, materialism, all of these things just didn't work out well. What I came up with, or I didn't come up with, I was reading another theologian who came up with this term that he calls hyparxiolatry. Hyparxiolatry. Love the word.
Our new word for today.
Absolutely. And for tomorrow, too. I think that's good for the rest of the week, hyparxiolatry. What hyparxiolatry is, and I think the last part, the olatry, gives it away, like idolatry. Hyparxiolatry is when an individual makes their self the idol of worship.
Right.
They are the important thing.
You're your own house god.
Yes, but it's not narcissism. It's the fact that I need to protect me. It's a type of miserliness, as this author writes, that characterizes thieves and murderers and criminals who are only concerned about their own needs and issues in the moment. That would be the low end of the numinous. This kind of materialistic, this folk that my sense of self is all about me. The focus is on me and just maintaining me. The other end of that, of the numinous, is a much more transcendent perspective, where one is able to step outside of the immediacy of their lives and to look at their lives from an ultimately eternal time perspective, to recognize that, wow, I'm going on for a long time here. How do I make sense of that? What is it that I need to do? What can I do? And what we realize, I think of people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Buddha, Jesus, Mother Teresa. These are all people that seem to be very high on the numinous, and that they went all in with their lives for the goals and dynamics that were important to them, and didn't count the cost. It wasn't the fact that I may die, so I need, no, I'm all in on this. I like the story about Martin Luther King when he gave I Have a Dream talk. That was right before he went to Memphis. And some people say that at that point, it looked like he may have known that something bad was going to happen to him when he went down to Memphis. But yet, knowing that something bad may happen, he went anyway. And that's the real thing about going all in. It's like he needed to do his work. He needed to bring social justice to the world. This fairness and racial equality is so important that he's all in on that. And although he may die and he may not get to the end, it doesn't matter. He needs to do this. And death is not a factor to worry about. And that's the incredible freeness that we get with a broad sense of infinitude, which is one of the dimensions of the numinous.
And where do you sit on that? Are you an all-in guy? I have a feeling you might be.
Well, I definitely get very, very passionate about things. I'm also a high conscientious guy as well. But what I like about my research that I find useful is that while I take that hard-nosed, cognitive, scientific, analytic approach, when I look at the results, I try to apply them to me. So understanding when I first did my spiritual transcendence, it was more of a study of spirituality. And the results of that research really opened up and clarified a lot of the issues that go into a spiritual relationship and developing your spirituality. And this helped me to, I think, advance further in that area because I had a better sense of what I needed to do. This whole idea of the numinous and of the three dimensions, infinitude, which looks at our orientation towards death, meaning, and worthiness, it gives me a sense of like, wow, I've got this whole sense of stuff going on inside of me, and that my drive to be something, my meaning, is wrapped up with my sense of worthiness. And I'm doing all this because I'm trying to make a long-term statement for my life that will continue to reverberate after I'm dead. One way, my writings and my research are some statement about infinitude, because hopefully they'll still be out there once I'm not. And that's part of my meaning. What is my meaning? Well, I try to understand better when we look at, we've developed a model of meaning called the logoplex.
We'll talk more about meaning in a moment, but before we get onto that, we're going to look at a letter through this lens, and we'll be doing that in just a moment.
The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material and other benefits.
My first men's retreat outside Berlin was a great success.
It was more powerful than I ever imagined. It was a place to feel safe, a little sanctuary to open up in.
I wasn't expecting to make such a deep connection with so many men all at once in such a short time.
The whole experience has been incredibly deep, transformative, and surprising. I've really found it challenging, but I've loved every minute of it.
And I cleared a lot of cobwebs that have been residing inside myself for a little while. It's opened up my thinking to be open to a bigger journey in the future.
And I'm very happy that I did it, because that turned out to be exactly everything I hoped it would be and more.
So I'm putting out the call for April 2026 from Thursday the 9th to Sunday the 12th of April. The theme is initiation, transitioning from one phase of your life to the next. Bookings are now open to all men at andrewgmarshall.com.
From pop music legend Cyndi Lauper and Broadway's Harvey Fierstein, Kinky Boots, the Tony and Grammy-winning feel-good best musical about seizing your destiny and being who you want to be. Be inspired by the Broadway show that has captured hearts around the world. Kinky Boots, November 28th through 30th, San Jose Center for the Performing Arts. On sale at BroadwaySanJose.com.
If you'd like to send us a letter and get some of the keenest minds in the world on your problems, well, you can go to my website, andrewgmarshall.com. You go to the podcast section, and you'll find a section where you can participate in the program. I am torn in two. I've been with my wife since I was in my teens, and we have 2 young children. However, 20 years later, I feel we have grown in different directions. I am ambitious for both my career and growing into my full potential, but my wife does not share any of my interests. She's family-focused, and that's great, but we don't really have that much in common anymore. Recently, I met another woman, and on paper, she's everything I want, interested in business, current affairs, and personal development. She's interested in me. I can't help but think she'll be a better match for me. My marriage is just marking time. But am I making a great mistake tearing my family in two? Ralph.
Very interesting letter. First, I need to say I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm a researcher. I do not do therapy, so I can't speak as a therapist. But there are obviously issues to address that are going on here. First and foremost, what you need to do is talk to your wife. You need to share with her your feelings and where you think things are going in the relationship and get her perspective as well. You don't know how she's feeling. She may be feeling the same way, but at some point, you need to have a dialogue to discuss this. Don't just jump off and have an affair, because that can be a disastrous experience. I mean, it may wind up not only destroying your marriage and ruining your relationship with your children, but the relationship itself may also fall apart. You know, as there's from Star Trek, there's this key, one of the episodes, you know, wanting and having are not the same thing. So that you want something gives passion, but once you have it, it may not realize what you thought it was originally. So before you jump in that direction, having a conversation with your wife is important. Second of all, when you look at the ebb and flow of marriages over time, marriages start off with a lot of enthusiasm and passion, but over time that seems to cool down. And particularly when children come along, the whole tempo and texture of family life changes significantly. And it's usually during those years of child rearing and development until they leave the nest, are sometimes associated with lower levels of marital satisfaction. Why? Because the emotional needs that you have in the relationship are not being satisfied to the same extent and with the same intensity now that children are here than when children were not there. So a lot of times these feelings of not feeling connected to your spouse, they pass once your children leave the nest and move on. But some of this also goes back to what we talked earlier about the crossover analysis, Andrew. This is about sitting down with your wife and getting this assessment to look at what these dynamics are. Is your wife really different, or are you just misinterpreting some of the dynamics that are going on in the relationship? Remember, the relationship has also changed for your wife as well. She's probably got major responsibilities around childcare and managing the children, managing the household. This certainly takes up a lot of her energy and distracts her from you. But it doesn't mean that she doesn't care or maybe doesn't share your interests. It may be that she has a new set of interests, a new set of priorities that she needs to deal with. And maybe you're feeling a little abandoned as a result of that. So I think it'd be good to see if the character has changed or if just style patterns have changed. Because if the style patterns have changed, then it's time to have a useful and meaningful dialogue about those changes and what those patterns really represent. So that would be a helpful thing to do.
Well, fortunately, we've got two ends of the spectrum because I don't do any research whatsoever, but I do sit here and talk to lots of people. And what I would say is it seems that your marriage has had a wake-up call because we sort of push down how we're feeling a lot of the time because a lot of people feel feelings get in the way. It makes them less productive. Let's get on with the target, getting the children up, getting them off to school, getting ourselves off to work and, meeting those sales targets or whatever it is. And we push down anything we think is going to get in the way of that. And here's something that I think is really important to say. Everything that gets pushed down doesn't disappear. It just pops up generally much stronger than it did beforehand. So I really like the idea of having a talk, but I would think it would be interesting to see how could we rediscover each other, because often we lose sight of somebody because we're stuck often with a very old template of who they are, and we do change. And particularly if we're going to take Ralph's idea on board that it's the first 30 years, you've changed a lot between your teens and whatever age you are now. So, let's actually get a bit deeper. Let's find out what's going on beneath the surface. And it could be that there's a lot of new things you could share, not just her coming over to your side. Maybe you could be going over to more towards some of her interests as well. And of course, you don't have to fulfill each other's interests, all of them. It's perfectly okay for you to go out bowling with your bowling mates and her to go off dancing with her dancing mates. Our partners don't have to fulfill every one of our wishes. We've sort of got into a bit of a bind these days where our wife or our partner has to be our best friend as well as our partner. That's rather a lot to put on one delicate pair of shoulders. So I hope that is helpful for you and you do have that conversation with your wife.
Could I add something?
Yes, of course you can.
I've been married for 45 years to my lovely wife. Both of us are professionals. Obviously, the psychologist, she's an accountant. In fact, she's a chief financial officer for a company. And we had 2 kids, raised 2 children. They're now adults and gone, and they are successful adults, and we're proud of them. But we felt, at some point, I felt the same way as this man was feeling. I felt I'm moving in one direction. My wife is moving in another direction. We've seen, the kids, the things. So one of the things that I suggested, I have an interest in coins, collecting coins and currency. So I went into a coin business, selling coins and currency, and invited her to partner with me in this. And that I know coins are not an interest to her, but accounting and running a business is very much interested to her. So we do this together. We go to coin shows together. We run this little business on the side together. And I found there's just one thing we could do to try and build in something that we can do together to compensate for the fact that sometimes you spend a lot of time apart in different ways.
And that's interesting that my partner and I have just started a joint project as well, a bit like that. We've done them in the past. Wonderful. And it really does feed the relationship. So maybe you could find some kind of way of putting your two interests together. So we've almost run out of time, but I need to ask you, as a witness on the meaningful life, what makes your life meaningful? Because I think you've probably given a lot of thought to this question.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, one of the things that gives meaning to my life is the work that I'm doing in the research. What I find most exciting about my research is that I'm looking at a psychological quality that uniquely defines our humanity. When we look at the world of psychology and all the variables that are out there, they're all animal models to it. You know, we have animal models of depression and hostility and all different kinds of OCD-ness. We can measure these in all animals. Even the big five can be validly measured and assessed in your pet cat and dog, because those qualities are adaptive even in higher mammal species. But what's out there that's uniquely human? Psychologically, what defines us as a human being? And for me, the answer to that question is the numinous. The numinous is a uniquely human quality. It defines us as a species. And when you talk to people about the numinous, about where they are, about what gives you meaning in your life, do you feel worthy and adequate enough? And how do you see your sense of time vis-a-vis this notion of death? What are you doing about that? You're having the most intimate conversation you could possibly have with another human being. This is the core of who he or she is. This is how their entire sense of personhood is being organized and directed in their lives. And once you understand that, then you truly understand the other person. So the work that I'm doing, I find, is very, very meaningful.
And I think as somebody on the day-to-day sharp end of psychology, the problem in my trade is we don't talk about spirituality enough. That it's all very, not materialistic. It's very psychological.
Secular. It's very secular.
Very secular. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons I started this podcast, because meaning is incredibly important, but we don't talk enough about it. So
no, we don't. And psychology has always been very, very negative about religion and spirituality. Some people just don't even want to talk about it. They think it's hoax, it's bogus, it's nonsense, and has no place in the scientific study of psychology. Now, on some levels, I understand that. Religion is about metaphysical realities. Metaphysics is completely outside the domain of science, which only focuses in on physical phenomena. But as a psychologist, you got to step back and realize that while most psychologists are atheistic and don't have any religious beliefs per se, most people in the world do. And that when we look at religion, you got to realize that every religion is existentially oriented. Every religion provides easily acceptable answers to complex existential questions. Like, is death the end? No, you have a mortal soul. Does life have any meaning or purpose? Of course, God has a plan for us. There's a reason why we're doing the things that we're doing.
But I think there's a big difference between taking them off the shelf that somebody else has given you and written for you and actually working out for yourself the answers to these questions.
Absolutely. Authenticity is important. But the issue that I'm saying that people are so attached to the religion is because it helps them answer these key questions in ways that they can understand. Am I worthy enough? Yes, you are. If you feel you've sinned, there's divine forgiveness.
As you could possibly guess, Ralph and I could talk for the next 20 years, probably without him taking a breath. That was a little teasing there at the end.
That's fine.
But thank you very much for being a brilliant and very articulate guest. If you'd like more of this conversation, it's not going to end. We're going to continue it in our bonus material. We're going to be talking about hope. What is it, why we need it, and how to find it in dark times. So I think that's a conversation you'd like to hear. And if you would like to hear the bonus material, you can subscribe directly via Apple or Spotify. And if you want to become a supporter of The Meaningful Life and unlock the bonus material that way, here are the details.
You've been listening to The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall. You can follow Andrew on Twitter, like him on Facebook, and please leave a review wherever you consume your podcasts. Making, editing, and distributing The Meaningful Life comes with substantial costs, and we'd like to ask for your help. Visit our website, andrewgmarshall.com/podcast, where you can join our supporters club and unlock bonus material for every program, send in a letter to be discussed by Andrew and his guests, and join a community of other people seeking to make their life meaningful. At the gold level, you get even more benefits. Production of The Meaningful Life with Andrew G. Marshall is by Michael Dooney. Social media by Madeleine Healy. Sound engineering and theme tune by Sebastian de la Luz Mendoza. And I'm Susie Colick. Please tell your friends and spread the word. Thank you.
From pop music legend Cyndi Lauper and Broadway's Harvey Fierstein, Kinky Boots, the Tony and Grammy-winning feel-good best musical about seizing your destiny and being who you want to be. Be inspired by the Broadway show that has captured hearts around the world. Kinky Boots, November 28th through 30th, San Jose Center for the Performing Arts. On sale at BroadwaySanJose.com.